One moment. You are on.
The meeting of the Committee on Legislation, Rules, and Policies of the Board of School Directors will please come to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Director Gokul Gandhi.
Present.
Director Leonard.
Present.
Director Simpson.
Present.
Director Taylor.
In attendance.
And Chair Peterson.
Present.
We have 5 members present.
The chair will now ask the secretary to lead us in the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance. Members, please mute your devices.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we begin tonight's meeting, we have a short announcement regarding interpretation services for the Spanish-speaking members of our audience.
Buenas noches. Esta junta escolar se transmitirá en español para aquellas personas que lo necesiten. Para escuchar esta junta escolar en español, marque el número 312-626-6799 y ponga el número de identificación de la junta, 608-130-5362. Te repito, para escuchar esta junta escolar en español, marque el número 312-626-6799 y ponga el número de identificación de la junta, 608-130-5362. Gracias.
Gracias. Pursuant to Board Rule 1.06, this meeting is being conducted virtually. Board members may be participating in person from the Central Services Building. In order to allow as much public access and participation as possible, this meeting is being broadcast via live stream on the MPS website and on the MPS YouTube stream, the links to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. We will now move to our items of business. As stated in the public notice, individuals who wish to speak were required to register in advance. I ask those waiting to speak, please remain on the platform until you are called upon. Although we are on a virtual platform, we will still follow Robert's Rules of Orders, which dictates that all comments should be directed to the chair. Also, any questions or requests, including those from board members or the administration, are to be directed towards the chair, who will determine the most efficient way to address them. As always, written testimony will be accepted for transmission. Office of Board Governance, P.O. Box 2181, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53201, or fax to 414-475-8071, or email it to governance@milwaukee.k12.wi.us. Finally, for our listening audience, if you wish to access this evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting the Meetings, Agendas, and Minutes page on the MPS website and choosing Online Agendas. Now, let us begin. Madam Secretary, item 1.
Item number 1 is action on a request to adopt a medication administration policy for Milwaukee Public Schools. The recommendation is that the board adopt a new policy 4.08 as presented in the attachments to this item.
Will the administration please present the item?
Good evening, Chair Peterson and members of the committee. Keith Posley, Superintendent of Schools. We are asking for your approval of the adoption of the medication administration policy. Travis Pinter is here this evening to present this item. And we also have Assistant City Attorney Nicholas Simran also joining us, and after which we will be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. Travis?
Thank you. Director Peterson, members of the committee, Travis Pinter, Senior Director of Specialized Services. I want to start off as we look at this policy by stating that this has been a collaborative effort, as Dr. Posley said, with Nicholas Sinram from the City Attorney's Office. We had input and collaboration with our district medical advisor, Dr. Reese, our Student Health Services Administration, represented by Linda Williams tonight, is here as well and collaborated, and our Chief Academic Officer, Jennifer Mims-Howell, was also working on this proposed policy. We start, as always, with our 5 priorities for success. I would just point out that this particular proposal tonight is really closest to our strength in communication and collaboration. That's really what we're looking at here, is transparency, communication, and collaborating. We started out with research and other district policies. I want to point out as we begin that we haven't had a policy in place, but what we have had is a nursing handbook that has been followed for many years that follows the best practices, and also basically our practices in the schools that we have reinforced through that. This policy isn't bringing anything new to that. It's actually putting into practice those things into a policy. When we looked around at other districts, most have policies. We looked at first at the state of Wisconsin because, of course, they have the same state legislation to be concerned with. And so looked at the other large districts in the state, Green Bay, Kenosha, Madison, and Racine. And then had to look, of course, at other large urban districts nationally. 3 in particular are cited here: Chicago, Minneapolis, and Seattle, because while we look at the state, we are also unique within the state. And so we wanted a comparison there. When we looked at the other policies, one of the things, the metrics we considered were nurses per school. And so we looked at our rates. We wanted to see how we compared. We compared favorably with the other schools that we were looking at, the other districts, and as well with district demographics, in particular, amount of school buildings, number of students, and specific needs to see if we matched up as well. And again, they were compared favorably to our situation. Looking at that, the trends and commonalities that came out were that large urban districts typically codify medication procedures into board policy. They do, in fact, operate in that way, and it's advised. Some of these have come into place recently. Chicago, for instance, their policy came into effect just a couple of years ago now. So some of these are recent as well, but many are doing this, and it tends to be the larger, more urban districts in particular. In these policies, often what happens is they adhere to their respective state guidelines. They work in collaboration with the district student health services handbook that they have. And they also tend to clarify restrictions and guidelines to medication administration. And so those are the things we took away and things we will specifically address with our policy. Speaking specifically to our policy now, and I know that's in the other attachment, I want to point out a few things of note just to make sure they're mentioned. Right off the bat, we have our guiding principles at the beginning, and these really drove our decision-making on this. Mitigating the impact of health inequities in MPS was very important to us, doing everything in the best interest of our students. Third, that medication administration is really done in a school environment only when necessary. We don't want to have any policy in which we feel that there's unnecessary medical administration, obviously, so only when necessary. And then fourth, that everything we did was based on evidence-based practice and the input from qualified healthcare professionals and other professionals in the field whom I mentioned at the beginning. Also, we have our overview on receiving medication. And this really happens in one of 3 ways in our schools. It's either administered by a nurse, most commonly, or it's provided under supervision of authorized school personnel. And that's specifically outlined on 2.b.3. And we'll talk about that a little bit here and certainly answer more questions about it if you have them. And that's what's referenced as delegation of that responsibility. And then 3 is self-administered by students with direct supervision, tending to be our older students in some cases who do that as well. So point 1 I wanted to mention in section I.D, there's it says there that MPS shall retain the right to decline to administer medication. I wanted to point this out specifically to assuage any fears that we weren't administering medication that certainly the students needed. But having this clause in there is important, we felt, because first of all, it would only be done in accordance with nursing and health service guidelines and in consultation with our Nursing and Health Services Administration. Some examples to think about that we included would be maybe there's a request for a medical treatment and it's not approved for whatever reason, or potentially a holistic application that we have questions about, or we haven't had this situation, but if there was a situation in our state around medical marijuana and there was legal in some circumstances and obviously was still in conflict with school policies in another. And then lastly, something like expired or contraindicated orders that may conflict with other medications. So just wanted to point this out. This one's in there not to deny anyone anything, but to allow our professionals and I to see things sometimes which they've caught and said, I got extra questions about this. We don't want to cause harm by any means. So that's what that policy is really about. The second point I wanted to make was in section 2.B.3, which I mentioned, which is around delegated medications. This is in accordance with the Wisconsin Administrative Code that's listed there, 6.03. And in it, it says that a registered nurse may delegate a non-nurse school staff member to administer medication. There are often limitations to this, and we have put them in our policy, which is very much in accordance with the other policies that we researched, particularly the large urban ones, but it's limited to those that can be given by mouth, topically, or transdermally. I want to point that out. And then the third point I wanted to make sure I pointed out was that which really flows from the last one, that in all cases, if there is an emergency of any kind, regardless of that administration we just talked about, we call 911 first at the onset. We wanted to make sure that was written into the code here. It has been our policy. Nothing's changed. We wanted to make sure that was clear. 911 is called in an ideal situation when we have students that require it. We have we have them assigned to schools where there is a full-time nurse, and that is, of course, our first and regular option. In the event, but even with a full-time nurse there, we call 911 because they're best equipped to handle emergency medical situations. They have a fast EMT response time to all MPS schools. And some of this discussion came out of a 2018 OCR decision that looked at a similar issue to what's been brought up here with nursing and medical administration, and said, from that decision and consultation, it was decided that we have very adequate coverage within the city. And when I want you to think about that as you look at this policy, that the state legislation that we are in adherence with is also kind of a broad brush, right, for the state. And so some of the things in there are really designed for a rural district that you might be on a bus ride for 30 minutes. In this, the closest building is 30 minutes away. And so there's a different kind of medical administration in the urban districts. And in what came out of that OCR decision as well, it's decided that we have our schools, of course, are positioned in places where we have fast medical responses. So that's always the first course of action in addition to our medical personnel. And those are the points that I wanted to point out. There's obviously more in that document, and Nicholas Sinram is here, as we said, and he and I and Linda Williams are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Do committee members wish to make comments or ask questions? Madam Secretary, do we have any public comment on this item?
Mr. Chair, we do not have any requests for public testimony on this item. However, I do see Director Leonard in the queue.
Director Leonard.
Just a question that really, I guess, is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm assuming that codifying this also, besides helping us make sure that we do things in a much more medically better way to make sure we're following that advice, I would assume that this also helps us with regards to legal parameters.
Administration?
I can jump in here. Nick Sinram, Assistant City Attorney, representing MPS. You're absolutely correct. I mean, our first priority was to ensure that we are securing the best medical practices and medical treatment for our students when necessary. But you're absolutely right that Wisconsin law allows for civil liability for school districts as long as you're following the policies here and the policies or the statutes and the state legislature has created. And so these policies set us up perfectly to accomplish that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Director Simpson.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is great. And I think sometimes it can get, you're in that moment, and sometimes making those medical decisions can get a little difficult to make on the spot. So this is going to be very helpful to our staff. I was just wondering what the rollout of this will be. Like you said, we've had this, a handbook maybe, but just this, specificity, when will that be rolled out and how will that be presented to staff so everybody's on the same page?
Administration.
Director Simpson, members of the committee, as soon as, if this passes, as soon as this does, we would communicate it through Linda Williams and her team through our nursing, our nurses in the field as well. But also we would communicate it via a variety of other means to make sure our schools know through our principals, through our Thursday updates, through a variety of other ways as well, so that they're aware that the policy is in place. As I said, it shouldn't be very jarring or surprising to them. It's things that we have been reinforcing and often have conveyed to parents, but it gives it a place where we can reference. But yes, we would convey it in all ways possible.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to make a comment. Director Gandhi, can you take the gavel?
Gavel has been passed.
So noted.
Director Peterson.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate the thorough explanation that was given to us tonight, reassuring to parents who have children who have medical issues. And it's good that it's all explicit and so people can follow it. The one question that I have is, if there is a concern by a parent or a disagreement in terms of proceeding with a certain medication or not, what's the procedure for a parent to follow?
Administration.
You're not on yet.
Okay. Director Peterson, members of the committee, Linda Williams, Student Health Services Supervisor. We have had parents that we have sat down with and we make a plan. We definitely address any of their concerns, and we have a written plan in place, and all the parties that are concerned with that plan are well advised as to how we will roll out this specific situation. So anytime a parent has a concern or a complaint or anything like that, we address it and make a plan specific to their child.
Director Peterson, follow up.
No, thank you very much for explaining that.
Any other questions, Director Peterson?
Nope.
Okay.
I'll take the gavel back.
The gavel back.
Okay.
So noted.
So what's the pleasure of the committee with respect to this item?
I move that we adopt the medication administration policy based on the administration's recommendations.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, will the secretary please call the roll?
On Director Gokul Gandhi's motion to approve the administration's recommendation relative to the presented medication administration policy as presented in the attachments to this item. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Taylor.
Aye.
And Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Okay. Madam Secretary, next item, please.
The next item is item number 2, which is action on a request to establish administrative policy 9.14 community schools. The recommendation is that the board adopt administrative policy 9.14 community schools as reflected in the amended draft policy, which is attached to this item, and that would be the third attachment in the list of the attachments to this item. That would be the policy
Okay.
for consideration for adoption.
Will the administration please present the item?
Good evening, Chair Peterson and members of the committee. We are requesting your approval of Administrative Policy 9.14, Community Schools. This evening, Mr. Christopher Garza, Ingrid Walker-Henry, and Dr. Ron Hurley will present this item. Upon completion of this presentation, we'd be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have. Mr. Garza?
Thank you, Dr. Posey. Good evening, Director Peterson, members of the committee. My name is Chris Garza, District Community School Coordinator, supporting community schools through the Office of School Administration. I'm here tonight with Ingrid Walker-Henry, Vice President of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, and Dr. Ryan Hurley, Director of the Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership, to provide an update on Resolution 2122R-005 and review for the committee how the community schools policy was developed. As the work group met throughout the months of September through October to craft a community schools policy, there were discussions that did correlate to the 5 priorities of success. Establishing a work group supported the opportunity to have collaboration occur among various stakeholders. The guided conversations provided an opportunity to hear various perspectives of increasing academic achievement, improving school culture, strengthening communication, and developing community school staff with shared leadership and culturally responsive practices. At this time, I would like to pass the presentation over to Ms. Ingrid Walker-Henry.
Resolution 2122R5 provided an opportunity for a work group to be established through a collaborative process with Milwaukee Public Schools, the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, and the United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. The work group's main purpose was to craft a community schools policy to guide existing community schools and to support the expansion of community schools within the Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership. Considerable input from various stakeholders was provided with the guidance and leadership of representatives from the Milwaukee Public Schools Administration, Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, United Way, and community school coordinators. Next slide, please. As can be seen on this slide, the work groups established were based on each of the Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership practices. The practices being cultural relevance, equity, and shared leadership, which were established after hundreds of community conversations with students, families, community members, and educators. The groups met 5 times from late September through late October. The work group was made up of various stakeholders that totaled 32 members that included staff, parents, and community members of current community schools. At the very beginning, the work group dedicated itself to understanding the community school strategy, which provided a pathway for the work group to support the crafting of a community schools policy. The work group aligned its work efforts to the 3 key practices, which again are shared leadership, equity, and cultural relevance. The development of subcommittees analyzing specific community schools data and answering specific guiding questions allowed for input to be received that would support the crafting of the community schools policy. Next slide, thank you. Within slide 5, you can see that an advisory committee was also established and met 5 times from early September through mid-November. This committee was led by representatives of Milwaukee Public Schools, the United Way, the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, and community school coordinators. This committee provided recommendations and were part of the decision-making process of how the work group would provide substantial input. This committee was also divided up into 3 subcommittees that mirror the work groups to maintain the focus of the key practices while going through an agreed upon revision process identified as PQP, which will be explained further on slide 6 with Dr. Ryan Hurley.
Director Peterson, members of the committee, Chris Garza, Community Schools Coordinator. On slide 6, you see a visual of the process the work group followed. The agreed upon process that was recommended by the advisory committee and incorporated when the work group was to analyze community conversation data collected from all current community schools in combination with universal mid-year reflection implementation data and input provided by the work group that led to crafting policy language. Work group members had the opportunity to provide a praise, a question for reflection, or a recommendation of how to continue polishing specific language within each key practice, which again, shared leadership, equity, and or cultural relevance. The work group completed the PQP process during its last meeting, and the advisory committee also had an opportunity to do the same process. The praises, questions, and recommended polishes were reviewed and were taken into consideration when making revisions to the community schools policy that was at that time in current draft form. The original plan was to have 12 students be in the virtual work group meetings scheduled from 4:30 to 6 p.m. But because this conflicted with student schedules and other student priorities, we decided to be proactive and come up with alternatives. Therefore, to meet the further resolve of having input from students, we worked with our community school principals and community school coordinators to have a community conversation with youth council members or members of a leadership organization that focused on 3 questions. Question 1, based on your experience, what aspects of the community school strategy has been successful and need to be emphasized? Question 2, based on your experience, what aspects of the community school strategy needs improvement? Question 3, based on your experience, what else needs to happen to successfully transform schools into places where every student is successful? At the K-5 or K school level, flexibility was given to modify the wording of the question for the students while keeping the main focus intact. Over 100 students from within our community schools participated in answering these 3 questions. Furthermore, close to 50 high school students participated in the PQP process to provide their input of the policy language created by the work group. This data has been included or was included and used to support revisions made to support the drafting of policy. On slide 7, you can see a visual representation of the proposed new language added under item 8, roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders and staff, letter A. The proposal is to establish and maintain a steering committee to support open communication, collaboration, and joint decision-making between Milwaukee Public Schools, Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, and United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. This committee will have 9 members that will be equally represented by each of the 3 partners within the community schools partnership to support and lead the various levels of work that drives the community school strategy within our schools. Each partner will have 1 lead to represent their organization, and these lead members will meet on a regular basis to coordinate, support, and co-lead the work of the Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership. With all this said, the community schools policy has been proposed to the committee to allow community schools to be both a place and a transformational strategy where students, families, staff, and the surrounding community can work together to ensure that every student is successful. Through policy, community schools within Milwaukee Public Schools will have consistent procedural and accountability processes, allowing for high-quality outcomes to support academic growth and positive school culture and climate. And finally, the work group believes through this collaborative effort, community schools will have more opportunities to focus and implement the 3 guiding practices that drive each of our community schools, which again are shared leadership, equity, and cultural relevance. I will now pass the presentation over to Dr. Ryan Hurley, Director of the Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership, to share with the committee next steps.
Hey, good evening. I'm going to share a brief overview of the journey community schools has taken over the last 7 years, as well as some hopes for the future. I have to first start by acknowledging the community organizing that predated the formal partnership. So many individuals and groups advocated for community schools, such as Schools and Communities United, but a special shout out to Micah. Micah had been advocating and organizing for community schools in Milwaukee for years, including early efforts at Hopkins Lloyd. In 2014, a bus of about 50 parents, community members, and school staff traveled to Cincinnati for the Coalition for Community Schools Conference. That experience not only allowed us to see community schools in action and engage with people from around the country, but it provided a collective experience in which we were all energized around. After our return, the school board released a grant process for school improvement. and 3 schools chose and were selected to become community schools. This is where the formal partnership was founded. When Hopkins Lloyd wasn't originally selected by the board, families, staff, and partners made their voice heard and quickly became the 4th school in the partnership. At the time, examples of national best practices and research guided our work, but we also knew how important it was that this work was responsive to Milwaukee and decided the first thing to do was engage students, families, staff, and the community in conversation about what they wanted community schools to be. It was those passionate conversations that resulted in the current strategy grounded in the 3 practices of shared leadership, equity, and cultural relevance. Since then, we've continued to strategically and intentionally grow the strategy to 15 community schools in the partnership with 10 dedicated community organizations, as well as build an organizational structure within United Way that includes experienced community school coordinators who have created systems of support for schools. The Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership is often highlighted nationally for the incredible work led by school communities, whether it's the walking school bus, youth leadership efforts, or our systems approach to school transformation. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, community schools and community school coordinators in particular responded quickly by utilizing our systems approach and authentic relationships to develop a coordinated response. Our team organized family check-ins, food and technology distribution, and virtual parent and community cafes that gave space for resource sharing and community building. Later that year, we were awarded a highly competitive Department of Education grant, which allowed us to deepen our work with the addition of a community school's health and wellness manager in partnership with Children's Wisconsin. This position is working to increase equity and access to health and wellness supports across community schools. Additionally, the grant allowed us to bring on an early childhood Bridges to School coordinator through 4C for Children. Bridges to School is a collective strategy to make connections between childcare providers, families, and community schools with the goal of creating a supportive and successful transition into kindergarten. This year, we hosted our 5th annual Community Schools Conference. The annual conference includes powerful keynote speakers and incredible workshops led by community leaders focused on culturally responsive and restorative practices. Over the years, we've been honored to have keynotes by Dr. Bettina Love, Dr. Goldie Muhammad, Jose Munoz, and G2 Brown. 91% of the staff that attended this year's conference believed it offered strategies that will promote enhancements in culturally responsive teaching and learning. And 86% agreed that working in a community school positively impacts their ability to be an effective educator. Since the beginning, community schools have advocated for ongoing anti-racist and restorative learning communities. In addition to the conferences, we've organized multiple learning cohorts with community partners, and while these experiences are impactful, barriers such as time and ongoing support continue to exist. This has been a winding journey that has not been without challenges. The work of community schools is to transform schools, but we often find the constraints of the system, both external and internally imposed barriers, to be in direct conflict with our goals. Which brings us to tonight. We are excited about a policy that supports community schools. We were intentional about the process that led to this policy to ensure collective engagement, which also demonstrated our ability to pivot and adjust when needed. Our entire team was instrumental, but a special shout out to Francisco Sanchez, who leads policy strategy on our team. While I'm excited about this policy's ability to sustain and grow this work into the future, a policy's impact is only as powerful as the commitment we all make to live up to the ideas in which it was drafted, to shift power to students and families, to put equity over organizations and elections, and the refusal to accept the status quo. With that said, if this policy passes, I'm honored to be a part of a team that will celebrate for a moment, then quickly mobilize to continue the fight. This will include ongoing engagement with school communities to draft a guidebook that will further expand upon the policy and continue to work towards creating the conditions in which every student can thrive. I believe the community school strategy and this policy is a vehicle, not the destination. There is much work to be done, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comment on this item? We'll take that first if we do, and then have committee comments.
Mr. Chair, we do have 2 individuals registered to speak on this item. Would you like to go to public testimony?
If there's no objection from a committee, yes, let's please do so.
Okay, the first speaker that we have registered on the platform tonight to speak on item number 2 is Nicolo Onorado. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Nicolo Onorado, Onorato.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Peterson, members of the board. I speak in favor of the adoption of the proposed community school policy. I've been working with community school teachers this year and took part in the policy writing process. The policy will ensure that community school model that has been implemented in 15 of our schools will continue to grow, expand, and support students, staff, parents, and communities throughout our city. This model has been shown to be effective not only in Milwaukee, but across the nation. And by adopting this policy, we'll provide a model and process that can be used to replicate our success and continue our growth. I strongly support the adoption of Administrative Policy 9.14 and will continue to advocate for the programs, schools, staff, and students that it will positively impact. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker that we have on the platform is Francisco Sanchez. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Francisco Sanchez, and I'm the Community Schools K-5 manager. Francisco Sanchez, S-A-N-C-H-E-Z. Forgot that piece. No problem. I'm the Community Schools K-5 manager, and I'm calling in support of the Community Schools policy. The policy you are voting on today was developed with the collective input and efforts from MPS administration, staff, students, families, MTA representatives, and community partners. These stakeholders made up the work groups that met with the intent of developing a policy that will help guide the work happening at our community schools forward. We all came together because we believe community schools serves as a vehicle to move our schools forward. We truly want to continue to transform our schools into the places where staff, students, families, and the surrounding community can work together to ensure every child is successful. As you have heard, the Milwaukee Community Schools Partnership has provided innovative and transformative ways to implement shared leadership, equity, and cultural relevance at our schools. As community schools, we've worked to engage all stakeholders to prioritize our school needs and work collectively to provide changes and solutions. A couple of examples are how at Hopkins Lloyd, they worked to address the issue of family engagement. Through their homework diners, they worked with families and students not only to get homework completed, but to build community where staff and students saw each other as partners in learning. To help establish positive relationships, not just at school, but at home as well. Another example is how our youth councils at our community schools work to transform how schools saw ethnic studies. It was our youth council at James Madison that really spearheaded the way to make sure that ethnic studies weren't just provided to their students, but became a standard across all high schools in MPS. These are just two examples of all of the amazing things that are happening at our community schools. As we continue our work, this policy will show the district's commitment to the Milwaukee Community School Partnership and commitment to the stakeholders that continuously engage in transforming our schools into the places that all of our students deserve. I ask that you vote in favor of this policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that completes public testimony on this item, and the item is back with the committee.
Thank you. Do committee members wish to make comments or to ask questions? Director Seedson.
Thank you, President Peterson. So thank you very much to everyone who put the presentation together. It was nice to see the history in Milwaukee of our community. I think that's important to highlight. And when I think of like our district, the amount of resources and energy everybody has to invest in something that we know is going to improve things for our schools, for our staff, for our families, and for our students. Community schools is just such a valuable thing to invest in. So I just want to really congratulate everybody who's worked so hard to make this come as far as it has during its history. And just, I'm thrilled to see this policy here because I think it really, shows that we're to this program and to growing it, to overcoming some of those barriers that we've heard about, and that we are, we really want to support the goals of the community school. So I don't have a question, but just want to thank everybody who's worked so hard on this and just really happy to see this policy come forward at this time. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Leonard.
I guess I am mirroring the same things that Director Simpson said. I have to say that in 30 years of looking at community-based education, I am very proud of the people that have spoken and have built this up. Your capacity, to me, has exceeded in many ways what I've seen in other parts of the country. So I just want to thank you for that, because I've always been a big proponent of community-based education. I see advantages to it that are so important to our schools. So they've been able to create cultures in our buildings of consensus and collective agreement and collective engagement. And I think that that's always the way to go. I just want to thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the next 5 years of with our community-based schools. Thank you.
Director Gokul-Gandhi.
I would also like to echo the sentiments of my colleagues and just thank all of the community school coordinators specifically, but then the team and all the support from across the community. I think that creating a grassroots movement within a building that focuses on culture and climate and growing the individual power of our students and our parents and our educators to be shared decision makers is such an important part of what we're trying to do. And I am just I'm a little bit biased, but I just think that this work is so important. And I just really want to thank everybody that's supported this. And I am excited to see that we're continuing with a policy.
Very good. Director Gokul-Gandhi, could you take the gavel? Because I'd like to make a comment as well.
Absolutely. Gavel has been passed.
Thank you. Okay. I just want to say a couple things and ask one question, which is, first of all, to say that I feel honored to have been part of the initial impulse to build community schools in the district, working with Ingrid Walker Henry and the MTA as a whole. We promoted that with administration back in 2013 and 2014, as was mentioned. And I want to just reiterate that I am connected a lot with people around the country in terms of schools for many years, and Milwaukee's community school project is very unique, especially in the fact that there's such strong cooperation between the administration, the MTA, United Way, and the various community partners that have pledged to really help us move forward. And our approach to community schools is also unique in the sense that many community schools are defined solely with wraparound services coming to the schools. And these are wraparound services in and of themselves are very important, don't get me wrong, but by us stressing shared leadership and equity and cultural relevance, the anti-racist work that's going on really is a step ahead of many community schools in the nation. The one thing that I was very impressed with, and it wasn't mentioned, but I thought it would be worthwhile, because if school leaders or educators or parents are learning about this for the first time, they might wonder, well, why can't my school be a community school? I was wondering if one of the presenters might explain the process by which schools become community schools, especially what I consider very important, the onboarding process. So so it's done in a very intentional and way. So if somebody from the administration could provide that information, I'd appreciate it.
Administration.
Director Peterson, members of the committee. So every year we have an opportunity for schools to apply, and we have the same three partners involved throughout that process in collaborating. I've had the pleasure in my position to speak to schools about community schools, about the partnership and the strategy. Just recently, actually, had an opportunity to present to a couple of schools, letting them know more about the process. Our intentions in the future is to communicate this through a Community Schools Digest or newsletter, and also reaching out to various schools and principals about the opportunity to apply for the 22-23 school year. We just recently got done reviewing applications for the 22-23 school year and allowing schools to be in a readiness cohort. So it's a rigorous process, and it's a collaborative process between Milwaukee Teachers Education Union, United Way, and Milwaukee Public Schools. And there are specific criteria that's actually in the policy in regards to what that process is. Once we go through the application process, we come through consensus is who we allow to be in the readiness cohort. And that takes about a semester where, again, the three partners come into the school and provide professional learning opportunities for the whole staff, and to encourage them to continue learning so that they are ready when they actually become full implementation schools. And again, we look at specific criteria through the readiness cohort. So just because they are in the readiness cohort does not mean that they're automatically going to be a full implementation community school. When a school is done with that readiness cohort, the three partners come together and review all applications again. And through a summative process, we make a decision based on the application, how the experience of the readiness cohort came to be, the willingness and the dedication of the staff that was shown throughout that readiness cohort, and then there has to be a 2/3 vote by the staff. We want a supermajority vote. Again, we talk about shared leadership, right? We talk about the belief of this is what we really want to do. So that's why we really believe in having that supermajority vote, because it takes a village, right, to raise a child and to support one another. And so based on, again, funding and other variables, then we make a decision as to how many schools we'll take into a readiness cohort, and then looking at finding partner agencies to be the lead agency for those schools. And then through that process, after that, we find a community school coordinator to be part of that school family.
Director Peterson, any follow-up?
No, that was an excellent explanation. Thank you very much. And I can take the gavel back.
I will hand the gavel back to you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? What's the pleasure of the committee with respect to this item?
I'll move approval of the item, President Peterson.
Okay, Director Taylor has moved approval of the item of the community schools policy. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director Taylor's motion to approve the administration's recommendation relative to a request to establish administrative policy 9.14, community schools. On the motion as read, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Taylor.
Aye.
And Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. Please, as Ryan said, let's celebrate, and I know they're going to get back to work right away too. Madam Secretary, next item, please.
The next item is item number 3, action on communication 2122C-004 regarding consideration of a proposed policy on time schedules and workload. The recommendation is that a committee of various key stakeholders is formed to review the proposed policy changes and develop a recommendation for the board to consider during the May 2022 board cycle. Mr. Chair, as a reminder, Administrative Policy 2.12 and advisory committees governs the formation of the administrative advisory committees.
Great. This item was proposed by the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, MTA. Madam Secretary, I'd like to ask Mr. Jim Nelson to make a presentation on their behalf.
So noted. Mr. Nelson, please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your presentation.
Hello, my name is Jim Nelson, N-E-L-S-E-N, and thank you very much for allowing me to present this tonight on behalf of MTEA.
Thank you.
So we want to begin, of course, with the 5 priorities of success from Dr. Posley. And we believe that the policy we are proposing will go a long way to improving district and school culture. A little history behind this proposed administrative policy. This used to exist as a procedure in the district. It was Administrative Procedure 6.27, and it established daily schedules for high schools and traditional middle schools, including number of classes taught, duty period, prep period, lunch, and procedures for subbing classes. This administrative procedure was adopted by a previous school board in 1982. It was revised in 2006, and it was rescinded in 2015 by a previous school board under a previous superintendent in the wake of Act 10. So it was a procedure that had been around for a long time and was a common custom in the district. Now, over the last few years, together in partnership with Dr. Posley, we have worked as the MTEA to establish much of what was lost after Act 10. And I must say that Dr. Posley and the rest of the administration have been very cooperative in doing this. We now have a collection of agreements that we have arrived at through the meet and confer process. Now, for the most part, these agreements have worked very well. Also, at the building level, most principals in MPS have adhered to the pre-Act 10 work rules. However, we've also found that there are a few inconsistencies across the district, and we would also like to codify all of these various agreements that we have with the administration to get it all written down in one place into a single school board policy. Our goal is simply to reduce teacher burnout. As we all know, there's a national teaching shortage, but it's especially acute in Milwaukee public schools. So what we did is we started with the old administrative procedure, which revolved around traditional 7-period-a-day schools. We then added in the language from the block schedule memorandum of understanding, which was used by the block schedule high schools prior to Act 10. We deleted language that was no longer relevant, and then we added in existing agreements with the district to get everything up to date. So you have the policy. I won't labor you with all the details. However, the key points are that period schools, teachers would have 5 classes per day, 1 duty period, 1 prep period, and a lunch. At block schedule schools, teachers would teach 6 classes, that's 3 on an A day, 3 on a B day, would have 1 daily prep period, a lunch, and also weekly common planning time. There would also be guaranteed prep time for special education teachers and a lunch period for elementary school teachers. And again, none of this is radical. This really is not a deviation at all from existing procedures in the district. We just want to make sure that it's written down all in one place. Finally, then, in terms of compensation, when teachers sub classes, they would be paid at 1.25 times the part-time certificated rate. Again, this is the old language prior to Act 10. It is currently being adhered to in almost all of the schools, but we found a few places where it's not quite 1.25. It's maybe 1.1, 1.15, something like that. And so we just want to make sure that we get all the schools on the same page, so to speak. There would also be some new language in terms of extra classes, because we also recognize that we have a number of small high schools and that principals do need flexibility with their budgets and staffing assignments in these small schools. So maybe, there are some cases where a teacher would like to pick up an extra class and a principal has an extra class that he or she needs to have taught. And so we would begin to compensate those teachers at 1.5 times their hourly rate, which would be consistent with other occupations in which people get paid time and a half for extra hours. So that's my presentation. Thank you again, and I'll take any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson. What's the pleasure of I guess before we go to administration, board members, do you have any questions for Mr. Nelson? We'll do that first.
Yeah, President Peterson, my hand motion isn't working. It's Director Taylor.
Okay, Director Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to know, I know it said the 1.25 or time and a half for teachers who sub. Will there be any exceptions for EAs as well too in reference to this plan?
Okay, so the question, Mr. Nelson, did you hear the question?
I did hear the question.
Okay.
This time we have not yet incorporated language for the EAs because what we really wanted to do as much as possible is to adhere to the old language. And so therefore adding in new language on EAs would have to be something additional, but it's certainly something that we would love to do in cooperation with the administration.
Follow up, Director Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I may be losing my signal, so I may fade out. I would love to see the cooperation with the EAs because I would love to support this, but coming from someone who used to be an EA and knowing how it goes, I would be more supporting this if we were working something out that would include them as well too.
Thank you very much, Director Taylor. Other members of the committee, would you like to ask a question to Mr. Nelson? Seeing none, I want to thank Mr. Nelson, and we'll go to the administration and ask them to make a presentation, and then the board members will ask the questions to the administration.
Chair Peterson. Good evening, Chair Peterson and members of the committee. We are asking the board to accept our plan regarding consideration of proposed policy on time, schedules, and workload. I have Adria Maddalini here with me this evening, and I'm going to ask her to to report out on this item. Adria.
Thank you, Dr. Posley. Chair Peterson and members of the committee, Adria Maddalini, Chief Human Resources Officer. I would like to concur with Mr. Nelson that teacher burnout is a major concern for us, as well as burnout of all our employees. It's been very, very challenging year for all of us. So as the administration, we're very interested and eager to work with the MTEA to walk through their proposal, see what the issues are at the schools, how we can remedy them potentially, and then bring forward a policy that can accomplish those goals and hopefully bring some relief to those individuals that are working with our children. And therefore, that's why we're happy to come back after the committee with a recommendation in the month of May.
Very good, thank you. Members of our board committee, I see Director Gokul Gandhi has her hand up. Go ahead, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Can either administration or Mr. Nelson, I'm not sure if he's on the call, explain to me how difficult it would be to amend this currently to add EAs? As I imagine that maybe there needs to be some fiscal impact analysis done, but if in the small chance that there isn't, I would love to see if we could maybe just fix that issue now, but it's wishful thinking.
I heard from Mr. Nelson that they're very interested in that, whether or not to be this same policy or not. I guess that's the question. Administration, do you have any comment?
Yes, Director Peterson, members of the committee, Adria Maddalini, Chief Human Resources Officer. Yes, we are aware that our EAs have had to take on an additional burden with covering classrooms all year. And we do have a separate rate of $5 that we provide paras for covering a classroom. We would be happy to revisit that. That is something that is not included in this policy. Originally, this policy is time, schedules, and workload for certificated staff. So that would not include paraprofessionals. And so that's my guess why originally they weren't included in here, but we're happy to address that. And if it's not in this policy or in some other avenue to address those concerns for paras.
Thank you. Just to clarify, that was $5 an hour the paras get for substituting, I believe. Director Gokul Gandhi, any follow-up?
Yeah, could I ask that we put a timeline on bringing back information or a policy for our EAs? Dr. Mann, how would we go about doing that?
Dr. Mann? Dr. Mann, please go ahead.
Sure. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I was just looking over the item, and the conversation is around a policy that does not exist anymore, right? So this is developing a brand new policy. So when you say a policy around including EAs, what is proposed here is still in draft format, right? It's something that the committee once developed in accordance with Administrative Policy 2.12, will consider in its entirety. So this meeting actually provides points for the group to consider, such as adding EAs when making a consideration of what the entire policy would look like. Also, while we are looking at the timeline for bringing this back, I do note that there is a May timeline on this item, which may be a little tight given that one, there is spring break in April and no committee meetings. There is a requirement that any introduced policy would be held over for 1 month to give the board an opportunity to review the policy and to make sure that it does have the legal enforceability before adoption. So I just want to be clear with that. The administration, said that they could come back in May with a policy for the board to consider. But at that time, it would not be adopted by the board. It would be held over for 1 month for the board's consideration and for legal consideration, and then adopted. So that would be at the earliest
June.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I just
Okay.
wanted the public to be aware of that process. And so when the conversation is there about adding EAs or some other requirements to this new policy, I just want everyone to realize that while there was a framework from a procedure, we currently do not have a policy on this matter.
Okay. And Dr. Gokagandhi, is that clear to you?
Yeah, so then in that case, could it be amended to say that we would like to include EAs, like an exploration or discovery of a proposed policy for the EAs, or is that an allowable addition or amendment to this proposed policy?
Dr. Mann?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Director Gokagandhi, members of the committee, if that is this committee's desire to add the EAs to the consideration of a draft policy coming forward, that would be also given to the committee who's looking at developing this written communication into a policy. Yes.
So it would just require a motion, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I see the superintendent has his hand up. Administration, go ahead.
Chair Peterson and members of the committee, the administration would ask if we could somehow come back in June for the EAs and try to keep this 2 separate tracks, and we bring both of them back because we are dealing with certified and certificated, and we just don't want to mix those 2 up. And so therefore we would need to keep it clean. We would prefer to bring back and stay with the timeline. We could stay with the timeline of returning it back in June, but just be 2 different items.
That sounds good to me. Director Mann and Dr. Mann, is that okay?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so if there were 2 separate items, that means that both items, if we are trying to keep with the June timeline, would need to be presented by May to be held over for 1 month and then being able to be adopted by the board at the same time, unless the intent is to have the EA policy come later. If that is the case, then that would be a different timeline. But in keeping with the timeline that the administration has laid out for this item, if they both are to be approved within that June board cycle, then it would need to come back in May with the item that addresses the teachers as well.
Got it. I'm going to ask the administration if you could imagine coming back in May with both two different policies, one for the classified, one for the certified. Administration?
Yeah.
President Peterson and members of the board, that will work for the administration.
Okay. Thank you very much. Director Simpson.
Thank you, President Peterson. Just wanted to thank Mr. Nelson for his presentation, and I just think it's very wise to take the amendments had in place for now and put them into a policy. I think it just ensures that they're being followed with fidelity. So I think that's a really wise step. And I just acknowledge that Act 10 really did a number on our educators and others who were affected by it. So anything we can do to kind of restore some of that and put some of those policies back in place, I think is really important for us to do. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you. What's the, any other comment, or what's the desire of the committee? Dr. Simpson. Dr.
Sorry,
Simpson.
had to find the button. Yeah, so I move approval of this item and with administration's recommendation.
Okay, and I could add that recommendation would include coming back with a policy for the EAs on the same timeline. Is that could be understood?
Thank you. Thank you, Director Peterson. Absolutely.
Okay, and Dr. Mann, does that sound correct to you?
Yes, and I'd like to read the motion given the amendment to the motion, just to be sure that I am capturing what Director Simpson's intent is. What I have is that Director Simpson moves approval of the administration's recommendation to form a committee of various key stakeholders consistent with Administrative Policy 2.12 on advisory committees to review the proposed policy, and I removed changes because this is a new policy, to review the proposed policy and develop recommendations for the board to consider during the May 22 board cycle, that any draft policy presented also include a provision for educational assistance.
Very good.
Yes, I just have one. So does it, educational assistance, do we also have to say and peer professionals, or is that?
Director Taylor?
I'm sorry. I just can't raise my hand. I've been trying to. No, I was going to say the paras are included in the educational assistance unit. That's, I guess, the new title of them, but yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sounds good. So that's clarified. Any other comment or question by the committee? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director Simpson's motion, as read into the record, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Taylor.
Aye.
And Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Before we go to the next item, can I just ask if there were any other speakers on the venue to speak on this issue?
I'm sorry, 1 second. This is item number 3. Item number 3 did have 2 speakers registered to speak on this item. Miss Crystal Ely, who is not, I'm not seeing her on the platform. And then Mr. Nicolo Onorado is on the platform to speak, is not on the platform as well. I'm sorry.
So let us hear from them. I know that we can't, if we had gone to the next item, we wouldn't have been able to hear from them. I apologize to those 2 individuals for not having asked them to testify earlier.
Mr.
Please.
Chair, they are not on the platform.
Oh,
yep.
Well, I still apologize. And I think I imagine they both were in favor of this policy, so they're probably pleased.
The item does indicate that they both support the item. You are correct.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Madam Secretary, what's next item on our agenda?
The next item is item number 4, action on communication 2122C-5 regarding consideration of a proposed policy on filling principal vacancies. The recommendation is that a committee of various key stakeholders is formed to review the proposed policy changes and develop recommendation for the board to consider during the May 2022 board cycle. Mr. Chair, I just want to give you also the reminder on this that the Administrative Policy 2.12 on advisory committees govern the formation of the administrative advisory committees as with the previous item.
Thank you. This item was proposed by the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, the MTA. So, Madam Secretary, I'd like to ask Mr. Ben Zabor to make a presentation on this item.
Mr. Zabor, please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Hello, good evening, Chair Peterson, school board directors, Dr. Posley, and members of the administration. Ben Zabor, Z-A-B-O-R.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me time to present this to you this evening. I appreciate it. I'm here this evening to present a proposed change for the hiring policies for principals and assistant principals as proposed and presented to the board by the MTEA. As I'm sure many of you are aware, that the leadership positions in school buildings are one of the most critical factors in determining a school's success or failure. The building leadership sets the tone for the whole building. They set instructional policy, they establish rules and procedures, and everything that they do determines how well a school community functions. Studies have shown that when teachers are involved in decision-making regarding the choice of instructional leadership, that the outcome is measurable and impactful as seen in school climate, teacher productivity, and student achievements. What we're proposing today would increase the involvement of the school community in the decision-making process around their building's leadership, because nobody knows the needs of a school better than the educators who work there every day and the parents who send their children there. The key proposed changes are quite straightforward. First, all principal and assistant principal vacancies would be filled through the interview process, except for the filling of vacancies on a temporary basis where the superintendent may, for a period of not more than one semester, appoint someone to a position. Currently, the superintendent may determine whether a position will be filled through the interview process or just directly assigned. The second key change would be the school interview committee will recommend 3 finalists in rank order to the superintendent's review committee, along with a written rationale as to why their top choice is their top selection and the best fit for their school community. As it stands currently, the interview committee submits 3 finalists in no order at all and no rationale. These changes are being proposed to empower school communities in their decision-making process around leadership of their buildings. The superintendent would retain the ultimate decision-making authority over the hiring of both principals and assistant principals. However, each school community would have more of a voice about what they think is best for their own buildings. They would be allowed to articulate why they believe a particular candidate is the right choice for their community. These simple changes would give every school community in MPS the opportunity to communicate to administration who they believe is best capable of leading their schools, while at the same time taking away virtually none of the administration's hiring authority. It would, in fact, provide the superintendent with more information than they are receiving right now. So this would be a benefit for the entire district, we believe. So thank you. That is what I had to present, and I'm certainly welcome to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. And before we go to the administration, do any board members have questions for Mr. Zabor?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Members of the committee, and I'm sorry to jump in out of order, but in looking at what is being proposed, the board may need to rescind a policy around the superintendent's duties and responsibilities, as this is a direct statement that falls under those duties and responsibilities. And given that the superintendent is in a contractual position, this would need to be approved by the city attorney for the board to consider this outside of other agreements.
That being said, we can still proceed with questions and commentary tonight.
So noted.
Yes, okay. Okay, any questions for Mrs. Zabor? Oh, yes, Mr. Leonard. Director
It's
Leonard.
not for Mr. Zabor, just what we just said just now. So we would not be voting on this because we have to wait on the city attorney? Is that what we're saying?
Madam Secretary, please respond.
Mr. Chair, given that there is not a motion here, I have nothing to advise on. I just wanted to advise the board of its contractual obligations that you already have, and to alert you that this would be in somewhat of a conflict if the board were to approve this policy tonight. As you stated, you certainly could continue to have conversation, and if it is the desire of the committee to have some level of input from the city attorney's office prior to making a vote, you could forward this item to the board without recommendation.
Okay, this item though, well, let's hear the administration's perspective, because my understanding is that they want to have more discussion about this. And so vote tonight by us to move it to have discussion wouldn't be in violation of anything, but it's good that you alerted to this to us.
So noted.
Administration, could you talk to us about your perspective on this item?
Good evening, Chair Peterson and members of the committee. We're asking the board to accept our plans regarding the consideration of proposed policy on fulfilling principal vacancies. I would ask that Adria Matalini provide some additional comments. Adria.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Posley, Chair Peterson, members of the committee, Adria Matalini, Chief Human Resources Officer. We appreciate the feedback and the inputs and suggestions from Mr. Zabor and the MTEA on this matter. We're always open to reviewing our interview process and the procedures we have in place. If there's things that can be improved upon, we're definitely willing to consider that. We understand the importance of the principal position, the assistant principal position. We just believe it's in the best interest that we all sit down together with the key stakeholders and really see what are the concerns and the issues that need to be addressed regarding the principal and assistant principal hiring process, and see if we can come together with some possible revisions to this policy.
Just a question to the administration. You're suggesting that we do it in the same timeline as the previous policy, like with a May and then a June adoption, perhaps? A May report back in May, and then that would allow us a month to do what is necessary.
That's correct, right?
Yes.
You're going to
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and in that process, I just say that we would consult the city attorney in terms of any conflict with contractual situation and try to resolve that, I assume. Administration, is that your understanding as well?
President Peterson and members of the committee, that is correct.
Okay, so on that basis, members of the committee, is there anybody else who wishes to ask a question of the administration or to make a comment? I don't see anybody. Therefore, I would need somebody to make a motion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
You do have 3 individuals on the platform registered to speak on this item.
Well, let us go there first. Absolutely.
So noted.
Go for it.
The first speaker on the platform registered to speak on this item is Jennifer Brendelson. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony. Okay, it looks like the next speaker that is on the platform registered to speak on this item is Nicolo Onorado. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony. Okay, the next speaker that we have registered to speak on this item that is on the platform is Amy Mizialko. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Amy Mizialko, Mizialko.
Thank you.
Dr. Mann, please be aware that I was registered for the previous item as well. There's something wrong with the platform on your end, and I want to make sure that speakers are able to speak to items that they've registered for. So please just take note of that.
I sure will. And we will work with technology to make sure that everybody who wants to speak gets an opportunity. Thank you so much for that heads up.
Item 3 and got confirmation at 2:49 from board governance. I registered for item 4 and got confirmation at 2:50. I'll begin my testimony now. President Peterson, Superintendent Posley, and school board directors, I'm joining you this evening to speak in support of items 3 and 4, the consideration of a proposed policy on time schedules and workload, as well as a consideration of a proposed policy on filling principal vacancies. MTA looks forward to scheduling meet and confer sessions with the administration to iron out policy details and finalize this item. Thank you very much.
Madam Secretary, is Jennifer Nicolo on the platform?
We do have Miss Ely, who had registered to speak on item 3, who is now on the platform.
Is it okay for her to speak on this?
Yes, it is.
Okay, please move forward.
Ms. Crystal Ely, please state your last name, please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Good evening. Crystal Ely, E-A-L-Y.
Thank you.
Good evening, administration, chair, and members of the board. I do not support item 3 that continues to put educational assistance on hold while we burn out 7 daily for an additional $5 an hour. Most of our EA unit are still working at 30 hours and continue to work multiple jobs. So the burnout of our EAs mean absolutely nothing to this administration and the union. We understand that we are classified and not certificate employees, but we are human. With the shortage of staff in the district right now, I wonder what a day without classified staff would look like in the district. We are burnt out. And not to have some compensation other than $5 is not fair, and it's not equity. And it doesn't say that we're worthy in this district. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, is there anybody else that is scheduled to speak?
Mr. Chair, that was the last individual on the platform registered to speak tonight.
Okay, what is the pleasure of the committee with respect to this item?
I move that we adopt the item with administration's recommendations.
Okay, the motion has been made. Madam Secretary, could you please call the roll?
On Director Gokul Gandhi's motion to adopt the administration's recommendation to form a committee of various key stakeholders consistent with Administrative Policy 2.12 to review the proposed policy and develop recommendations for the board to consider during the May 2022 board cycle. On the motion is read into the record, Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard,
Aye.
Director Seamson,
Aye.
Director Taylor, Director Taylor, and Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 4 ayes, 1 temporarily absent. The motion passes.
And I want to thank the people who testified and also Mr. Zaber. Sorry that I mispronounced your name. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the fact that we're working together on these items. Madam Secretary, what's the next item, please?
Mr. Chair, I just want to apologize for anybody who registered to speak on an item that did not make it through on the platform, and we will definitely be working with technology to make sure that everyone who would like to speak gets an opportunity to for every item.
Thank you. That's important. Thank you.
Yes, it is. The next item is item number 5, action on proposed amendments to various board rules in accordance with Board Rule 1.11, amendments to board rules. The recommendation is that the board adopt the amendments to the board rules as presented in the attachments to this item and reaffirm the rules for which no amendments are necessary.
Will the Office of Board Governance please present the item?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the committee. And so in keeping with a review of policies and board rules, tonight we are presenting some board rules for your consideration. In accordance with the provisions of the Wisconsin Statutes, Chapter 119, and with other applicable statutes governing cities of the first class, the Milwaukee Board of School Directors is empowered to establish rules for its own governance. In accordance with the Board Governance Policy 2.03, board rules and duties, which requires the board rules be revisited periodically to determine their coherence and appropriateness to the present mission of the school district. The Office of Board Governance has completed its review and is proposing certain amendments to the board rules for adoption by the board. Where appropriate, we have consulted with the Office of Accountability and Efficiency as well as the school administration. Board Rule 1.11, amendments to board rules state that proposed amendments to the rules shall be presented at a regular meeting and shall be referred to the Committee on Legislation, Rules, and Policies for its consideration and report thereon. In compliance with this board rule, the items before you tonight were presented through the November 2021 regular board meeting. As the board rule states, the committee's report with respect to such proposed amendments shall be presented to the board and then held over until the next meeting, when it shall be considered and acted upon by the board. Therefore, if approved by the board this month, this item will be held over in April and presented in May of 2022 for final adoption of the amendments. A recorded affirmative vote of a majority of the members of the board shall be necessary for adoption of the amendment or to repeal of the rules. The Office of Board Governance recommends that the board adopt the amendments to the board rules as presented in the attachments to this item and reaffirm those rules for which no amendments are necessary.
Thank you. Do committee members wish to make comments or ask questions? I don't see any comments or questions to what's the pleasure of the committee on this item.
I move that we adopt the proposed amendments to various board rules in accordance with Board Rule 1.11.
Thank you, Director.
Dr. Mann.
Thank you, Director Gokogandi. Any other comments on this by the committee? Do we have any public testimony, Dr. Mann, on this?
Mr. Chair, we have no request for public testimony on this item.
Okay, then would you please call the roll?
On Director Gokogandhi's motion to adopt the proposed amendments to various board rules in accordance with Board Rule 1.11, amendments to the rules, and to reaffirm those rules for which no amendments are necessary. On the motion as read into the record, Director Gokogandhi. Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director Seamson.
Aye.
Director Taylor,
Aye.
and Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, next item, please.
The next item is item number 6, which is action on a request to reaffirm administrative policy 8.45 public school open enrollment. The recommendation is that the board reaffirm administrative policy 8.45 public school open enrollment.
Will the administration please present the item?
Good evening, Chair Peterson and members of the committee. We are asking the board's approval to reaffirm Administrative Policy 8.45, Public School Open Enrollment. I have with me this evening Mr. Matthew Boswell, and between the two of us, we can answer any questions that you may have regards to this item. Thank you.
Do committees wish to ask any questions? Seeing no questions, what's the pleasure of the committee? Director Simpson.
Director Leonard, did you have a question? I didn't mean to step. No, okay. All right. So I move that we adopt administration's request to reaffirm administration policy 8.45 regarding public school open enrollment. And I would just encourage people who can take advantage of that to come into our schools and ask some questions and look around, because we have wonderful programs here, and I invite everybody to come join us.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, could you please call the roll?
On Director Simpson's motion to approve the administration's recommendation relative to the request to reaffirm administrative policy 8.45 public school open enrollment. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director Simpson.
Aye.
Director Taylor. Director Taylor.
Aye, and I need to be temporarily excused for 10 minutes, Madam Clerk.
So noted. And Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, next item, please.
The next item is item 7, which is action on a request to approve revisions to Administrative Policy 7.10, Driver's Ed. The recommendation is that the board approve the proposed revisions to Administrative Policy 7.10 as detailed in the attachments to this item.
Will the administration please present this item?
Good evening, Chair Peterson and members of the committee. We are asking that the board approve the revisions made to Administrative Policy 7.10, Driver's Education. I have Martha Kreisman here to provide some additional comments. Martha?
Chair Peterson, members of the committee, Martha Kreitzman, Chief Financial Officer. Wisconsin Act 64 became law in July of 2021. The law reduced the age to obtain a learner's permit from age 15 and a half to 15. Students still need to be 16 to earn a probationary operator's license. By adjusting the age, students will have more opportunity for practice behind the wheel in all types of weather. The instructional permits will also be valid for an extended period from previously 12 months to 18 months. The change in law is reflected in the proposed revision to the policy attached. Other changes cleaned up some of the language in the item. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, do we have any public commentary on this issue?
Mr. Chair, we have no request for public testimony on this item.
Okay, then committee members, do you wish to make comments or ask questions? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Would somebody please make a motion? Director Leonard.
I move to approve the revisions to policy 7.10, driver's education policy.
Thank you. Any final comments by anybody on the committee? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director Leonard's motion to approve the administration's recommendation relative to the revisions to Administrative Policy 7.10, Driver's Education. Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director Simpson,
Aye.
Director Taylor. Oh, Director Taylor did ask to be excused temporarily absent. And then Chair Peterson.
Aye.
That's 4 ayes, 1 temporarily absent. The motion passes.
Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Mr. Chair, that was the last item on this meeting's agenda.
Oh, I guess it allows people to celebrate St. Patrick's Day if they so desire. There being no further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you.